Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Julia's world shatters when her husband, Michael, abandons her, 8 months pregnant, with their child for another woman, Valerie. Left to face debt and betrayal, Julia refuses to crumble. Instead, she builds a new life, creating a successful bakery business, Flavors of Home, with the support of loyal friends like Isabella and the guidance of Mr. Thompson. This is the story of a woman who turns heartbreak into empowerment, finding strength not in revenge, but in rebuilding her life for herself and her son, Leo. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. A betrayal or freedom, the sweetest form of revenge. The sound of the key turning in the lock used to be the melody of home, the signal that everything was in place. But on a rainy Tuesday in October, it became the ominous sound of a shattered life. For Julia, 8 months pregnant and softly humming a lullaby in a room she had painted a bright yellow, that sound marked the end of everything she once knew. Her husband, Michael, didn't just leave through the door. He shattered their shared future for a life with someone else, leaving Julia to face an overwhelming debt and a child he no longer wanted. This isn't merely a story of heartbreak. It's the story of a woman who, though broken, chose not to cry but to rise and build something stronger from the wreckage. But before we continue, tell me, have you ever experienced a moment that felt like the end, only to find a new beginning? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about resilience. The air in their small apartment on Elm Street was thick with the scent of fresh paint and the hope of a new life. Julia stood in the doorway of what would soon be the nursery, one hand gently resting on her swollen belly. The walls were painted a bright yellow, the shade of sunflowers, representing new beginnings. A half-assembled white crib stood in the corner. Over the last 3 weeks, this room had become her sanctuary, a symbol of the love she felt for the tiny life growing inside her, and for her husband, Michael. He was running late that night, but it wasn't unusual. As a senior partner at the well-regarded Velasco and Solis architectural firm, late hours were part of the deal. It was the price they paid for the life they had. A cozy apartment, dinners out, and a future that seemed so bright, with their son on the way, who they had already decided to name Leo. Julia smiled as she traced the outline of a cloud she had painted above the crib, Leo's little sky. The familiar sound of the key in the lock pulled her from her thoughts. "Michael, you're home," she said, her voice filled with relief. "I just finished the clouds. You've got to see them." She stepped out of the room, wiping her hands on her jeans, ready to greet him with a smile. But that smile faltered the moment she saw him. He was standing in the doorway, his expensive overcoat dripping with rain, a stark contrast to the warmth she had been imagining. His face, usually warm and open, was now an emotionless mask. He wasn't looking at her, but rather through her, his eyes unfocused. He clutched his leather briefcase so tightly that his knuckles were white. "Michael, is everything okay at work?" she asked, a slow, anxious thumping starting in her chest. When he finally met her gaze, the coldness in his eyes hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't the man who whispered dreams in her ear in the dark, who had kissed her belly just that morning. This man was a stranger. "We need to talk, Julia." His voice was flat, empty of any warmth. He didn't remove his coat or come over to kiss her. "Okay," she replied slowly, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "Let me get you a towel." "No," he snapped, the words sharp, making her flinch. "Just sit down." He gestured toward the living room sofa, the one they had picked out together, playfully bickering over fabric swatches. She walked over to it in a daze, every fiber of her being screaming that her world was about to collapse. He remained standing, like a prosecutor addressing the accused. "I'm not happy, Julia," he began, the words cold and rehearsed. "I haven't been for a long time." Julia stared at him, confused. "What do you mean? Just last week we were planning the baby shower. You were so excited." "Maybe that was part of the problem," he said, a brief flicker of something crossing his face. "I've been trying to make it work for the sake of the situation." "The situation?" she repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You mean our baby? Our son?" "It's not that simple," he continued, now pacing, agitated. "There's someone else." Those 3 words cut through the air like a knife, leaving her breathless, disoriented. Julia felt as though she had been plunged into icy water. The nursery, the unfinished crib, the smell of fresh paint. It all felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Who?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Her name is Valerie," Michael said, his voice thick with an unsettling reverence. "She's a new partner at the firm, working on the Mirador development project. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. 6 months. The timeline crashed down on her, an unbearable weight. 6 months ago, they had celebrated their second wedding anniversary. 6 months ago, they had been trying to conceive a baby, and now, he had been with Valerie while holding her, while they dreamed about their family. The nausea rising in her throat wasn't due to pregnancy. She understands me, Michael continued, his voice gaining an edge of self-righteousness. She sees my ambition. We connect on a level that you and I just don't anymore. Julia felt a rush of fury. I gave up my career as a graphic designer for you. I moved to this city for you. I'm carrying your child, Michael. What's a deeper connection than that? It's not about that, he waved dismissively. It's about intellectual synergy, a shared vision for the future. Valerie and I are going to be a power couple. We've got a multi-million-dollar deal closing in Marbella next month. He was talking about Marbella and power couples, while she stood there in their 2-bedroom apartment, 8 months pregnant with his child. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. So what now? Julia's voice was dangerously low. I'm leaving, Michael said, his words cutting through the silence. I've already put a deposit down on a place with Valerie in the Zenith Tower. My things are being moved tomorrow. My lawyer will be in touch with you about the arrangements. Arrangements? Julia repeated bitterly, a laugh escaping her lips. You can't be serious, Michael. Look at me. I'm 8 months pregnant with your child. You can't just walk away. This is the part I knew you wouldn't understand, he said, sighing as he ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. The baby complicates things, I'll admit. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm in love with Valerie. Being here with you would be a lie, and I won't live a lie. So you lied for 6 months instead? She shot back, her voice filled with fury. Michael looked away, the shame evident in his eyes. I wanted to find the right time. The right time? She retorted. When? After our son was born? Were you going to wait until I was in labor to tell me you had a new family? He didn't respond. Instead, he walked over to the desk in the corner, grabbed a checkbook, scribbled something quickly, tore the check out, and placed it on the coffee table. This should cover you for a few months, he said, his tone detached. To get you on your feet. Julia looked at the check, the ultimate insult. He thought he could buy his way out of his responsibilities, his vows, and his own child. She stood up, trembling with rage, and walked to the table. She picked up the check, looked him in the eye, and slowly tore it into 4 neat pieces. Letting them fall to the floor, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I don't want your money. I want you to leave. Now. For the first time, uncertainty flashed in his eyes. He had expected tears, begging, hysteria. But instead, he saw a strength that unsettled him. Without another word, he turned and left. As he reached the door, he paused with his hand on the knob. My lawyer is Roberto Perez, he said over his shoulder. He'll be in touch, and then he was gone. The door closed with a finality that echoed through the apartment. Julia stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the torn pieces of the check scattered at her feet. Her gaze drifted to the empty nursery, to the yellow walls, and the half-built crib. The scent of paint, once a symbol of hope, now felt suffocating. She sank to her knees, a sob rising from deep within her. Her hands instinctively cradled the life he had just abandoned. The life they had dreamed of was now shattered, swept away by a storm she never saw coming. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm telling you, Isabella said firmly. We've been friends since we were 10, and we survived Mrs. Juarez's chemistry class together. We can survive this, you idiot. Now finish your eggs. The call from Roberto Perez came 2 days later. His voice was smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. He informed Julia that Michael was offering her a one-time settlement of $10,000 contingent on her signing a confidentiality agreement and waiving all future claims for spousal or child support. Child support, Julia repeated, her voice trembling with rage. He's signing away his rights to his own child. Mr. Michael feels it is best to make a clean break, Perez responded coolly. He believes a lump sum payment provides you with the immediate resources to start a new life, untethered by future entanglements, untethered by his own son. The sanitized corporate language made it all the more grotesque. Tell Mr. Michael, Julia said, her voice dripping us. To go to hell, she hung up the phone, her hand shaking. The bravado lasted about 5 minutes before the crushing weight of her situation returned. She was turning down $10,000, money she desperately needed on principle. But what good was principle when you couldn't afford diapers? The lowest point came a week before she was due to move out. She was trying to pack, but the task felt monumental. Every box she filled was an admission of defeat. She sank to the floor of the half-dismantled nursery, surrounded by boxes of tiny clothes and unread parenting books. The yellow walls seemed to mock her with their false cheerfulness. The pain was a physical weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She felt utterly and completely alone. She wasn't just losing a husband. She was losing the entire future she had believed in. She was a failure. A discarded pregnant woman nobody wanted. She curled into a ball, her body racked with sobs, her hands gripping her belly as Leo kicked inside, oblivious to his mother's despair. She cried for her lost love, for her unborn son's lost father, and for her own shattered identity. She cried until she had no tears left, leaving her feeling hollow, a fragile shell of the woman she used to be, lying there on the cold wood floor, surrounded by the ruins of her life. Julia had finally hit rock bottom. The silence of the empty apartment was broken only by her ragged breathing. There was nowhere to go but up. But in that moment, she couldn't even imagine how to stand. Interactive question. What would you do if you were in Julia's shoes? At your life's lowest point, what small thing could give you a push? Think about that and comment below. And if this story is inspiring you, give this video a like and subscribe to join our community. The first few weeks in Isabella's apartment were a period of suspended animation. Julia existed in a fog, moving between the guest bed and the living room sofa. Isabella was a patient and unwavering presence, leaving her food, checking on her, but mostly giving her the space to grieve. She took care of the logistics of moving Julia's remaining belongings into Asmal's storage unit, a task for which Julia was infinitely grateful. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic epiphany, but with a quiet, mundane craving. One dreary afternoon, as rain lashed against the window, Julia was assailed by a sudden, intense desire for her grandmother's lemon lavender cake. It was a taste from her childhood, a confection of comfort and unconditional love. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had been a baker, her kitchen a magical place of warmth, sugared air, and gentle wisdom. She had passed away 3 years prior, leaving Julia with her cherished handwritten recipe book. On a whim, Julia asked Isabella if she still had the box labeled Fragile Kitchen from the storage unit. Isabella, sensing the first glimpse of life in her friend in weeks, retrieved it that same night. Julia carefully lifted the worn, leather-bound book from the box. Its pages were brittle and stained with vanilla and butter, the familiar cursive script, a balm to her soul. She found the recipe, its instructions interspersed with Eleanor's little notes. Be patient with the zest. That's where the sun lives. Isabella's kitchen was small, but it had the basics. Julia found flour, sugar, eggs. She sent Isabella out for lemons and dried lavender. As she began to measure and mix, something inside her began to shift. The rhythmic, familiar actions were meditative. Creaming the butter and sugar, zesting the lemons, folding in the flour. Each step was a small, manageable task in a life that felt overwhelmingly chaotic. The simple act of creation was an antidote to the destruction she had endured. As the cake baked, a fragrant, hopeful aroma filled the small apartment, chasing away the stale air of despair. When it was done, she drizzled it with a simple glaze and sprinkled lavender buds on top. It looked exactly as she remembered. She and Isabella sat at the small kitchen table and each took a bite. The flavor was a revelation, bright, sweet, floral, and deeply comforting. It tasted like sunshine. It tasted like hope. For the first time in over a month, Julia felt a genuine smile reach her eyes. "It's good," she said, surprised by the simple pleasure it brought her. "Good?" Isabella exclaimed, her mouth full. "Julia, this is art. This is the best cake I have ever eaten in my entire life. No exaggeration." That night, Julia couldn't sleep. But for the first time, it wasn't from anxiety. An idea, fragile but persistent, had taken root in her mind. What if she could make this, not just for herself, but as a way to build a life? The next morning, she baked again, a sea salt, dark chocolate tart, then a batch of cardamom orange oat cookies. Isabella took the extras to the hospital, and her colleagues devoured them within minutes. The nurses started stopping by her apartment on their way home, pressing money into Julia's hand and asking if she had any more of those cookies. A tiny home-based business was born out of Isabella's kitchen. Julia started an Instagram page posting simple, beautiful photos of her creations. She called her fledgling company Flavors of Home. The name felt right. She wasn't just selling baked goods. She was selling comfort, a small piece of sanctuary in a chaotic world. Orders began to trickle in from friends of friends, then from strangers. She specialized in unique flavor combinations inspired by her grandmother's book, things you couldn't find in a typical bakery. Her days took on a new rhythm. She woke up early. She baked while the city was still quiet. She managed her orders and social media, and she rested in the afternoon. The work was demanding, especially in her final weeks of pregnancy. But it was hers. Every euro she earned, every rave review she received was a brick in the foundation of her new life. One of her regular customers was a kind, elderly man named Mr. Thompson, who lived in the same apartment building. He ordered a small cake every Friday, always paying with a 20 note and telling her to keep the change. He was a retired accountant with a sharp mind and twinkling eyes. One Friday, as she delivered his weekly rosemary and pear tart, he invited her in for a cup of tea. "My dear," he said, after they had chatted for a while about her budding business, "you have a remarkable product and a tremendous work ethic, but you are thinking too small." Julia was taken aback. "I'm just trying to make enough to pay for diapers, Mr. Thompson." "Nonsense," he scoffed gently. "An artist should never settle for only selling sketches. You have a brand here, a story. Have you considered a spot at the weekend farmers market or approaching local coffee shops?" He then spent an hour talking to her about the basics of a business plan, profit margins, scalability. He saw something in her that she hadn't dared to see in herself. Not a victim, but an entrepreneur. The conversation with Mr. Thompson lit a fire under her. He didn't just offer advice. He offered a roadmap. He helped her register her business. He helped her apply for a spot at the prestigious downtown farmers market. And he helped her create a simple, effective budget. He even offered her a small interest-free loan of $2,000 from his own savings to cover the initial costs of setting up the market stall, telling her to consider it an old man's investment in a sweeter future. 2 weeks before her due date, Julia worked her first day at the farmer's market. She was exhausted. Her back ached and she was terrified nobody would buy anything. She sold out in 3 hours, standing there behind her small table, surrounded by the fruits of her labor, making change for a customer as her baby kicked gently within her. Julia felt a profound sense of accomplishment. It was a small victory, but it was a beginning. She was no longer just surviving. She was building, one cake at a time. Leo was born on a crisp November morning, a healthy, beautiful baby boy with a shock of blonde hair and his mother's determined eyes. Holding him in her arms for the first time, Julia felt a love so fierce and absolute, it eclipsed all the pain that had come before. This perfect little human was her why. He was the reason she had to succeed, the motivation behind every early morning and every late night. The first few months were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the constant sweet scent of milk and baking flour. Juggling a newborn and a growing business was the hardest thing Julia had ever done. She would bake with Leo, sleeping in a sling against her chest. The rhythmic hum of the mixer often lulled him to sleep. She learned to type emails one-handed while nursing, to negotiate with suppliers while cradling a fussy baby. Isabella continued to be her rock, often coming home from an exhausting 12-hour shift at the hospital, and watching Leo so Julia could get a few precious hours of uninterrupted work or sleep. The farmer's market stall quickly became a local sensation. People would line up for her unique creations, the lemon lavender cake, the salted caramel chocolate tart, the Earl Grey tea scones. She had a story that resonated with people. The single mother building a life for her son. A local food blogger wrote a glowing article titled "The Sweetest Vengeance." And suddenly, flavors of home was the talk of the town. The income from the market and a few steady orders from cafes was enough to get by. But Julia knew she couldn't operate out of Isabella's tiny kitchen forever. The loan from Mr. Thompson had been a godsend, but she needed real investment to grow. She spent her nights after Leo was asleep meticulously, refining the business plan Mr. Thompson had helped her create. She researched commercial kitchen rentals, packaging costs, and potential storefront locations. Her big break came from an unexpected source. One of the cafes she supplied, the Daily Grind, was a small independent chain with 3 locations. The owner, a shrewd businesswoman named Sarah Chen, was impressed not only with Julia's products, but with her professionalism and drive. "Your stuff flies off the shelves," Sarah told her one afternoon as Julia was making her weekly delivery. "And your brand is fantastic. People aren't just buying a cookie. They're buying the story of flavors of home. What's your next move, Julia?" Emboldened by weeks of research, took a deep breath. "I want to open my own storefront, a small bakery and cafe, a place that feels like a true refuge." Sarah listened intently as Julia laid out her vision. She showed her the business plan, the sales figures from the market, the projected growth. Sarah, who had built her own business from a single coffee cart, recognized the same spark in Julia. "I know a space," Sarah said, a thoughtful look on her face. "On Hawthorne Avenue, it used to be a bookstore. The rent is high, but the foot traffic is incredible. It would be perfect for you." She paused, then added, "And I know a few investors who are looking for exactly this kind of local, passion-driven, scalable business. Let me make a call." The meeting was set for the following week. Julia was terrified. She bought a new blazer at a second-hand store, created a professional presentation, and arranged for Isabella to watch Leo. She walked into a sleek, intimidating boardroom to pitch her dream to 2 poker-faced investors, friends of Sarah's. She spoke with a passion and clarity that surprised even herself. She didn't just talk about profit margins and customer acquisition. She talked about the feeling of home, the power of comfort, and the legacy she wanted to build for her son. At the end of her presentation, there was a long silence. Then, one of the investors, a woman named Catherine Royce, leaned forward. "That was one of the most compelling proposals I've heard all year. We're in." They offered her a seed investment of $75,000 for a minority stake in the company. It was more money than Julia had ever imagined. She walked out of the building in a daze, the signed agreement in her hand, feeling heavier and more valuable than gold. Meanwhile, miles away, in Thestorel luxury of the Zenith Tower, Michael's life was not the glittering success he had envisioned. Valerie was beautiful, ambitious, and exciting, but she was also demanding and materialistic. Their power couple life was a performance, a curated series of expensive dinners, charity galas, and Instagram posts. There was a hollowness to it, a transactional quality that left Michael feeling strangely empty. He thought of Julia from time to time, usually late at night. He imagined she had probably moved back home with her parents, defeated. He pictured her with the baby, his son, a complication he had successfully excised from his sleek new life. He once saw the food blog article about flavors of home on a shared social media feed. He had scoffed. "Good for her," he had said to Valerie with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Making little cakes. How quaint." Valerie had glanced at the article. Her perfectly sculpted lips tightened into a thin line. "Is that the woman you left?" she asked, a hint of something unreadable in her voice. "She looks resourceful." Michael didn't recognize the woman in the article, smiling confidently behind a table laden with beautiful cakes. The Julia he had left was broken, crying on their apartment floor. This new version was a stranger to him, and a small unwanted seed of curiosity was planted in his mind. He quickly dismissed it. He had made his choice. He had chosen power, ambition, and Valerie. He had everything he ever wanted, or so he told himself. Back on Hawthorne Avenue, Julia signed the lease for her new bakery. The space was dusty and smelled of old paper, but it had large front windows and beautiful exposed brick walls. Standing in the middle of the empty room with Leo cooping in his carrier, she could see in her mind's eye the glass display cases filled with treats, the small wooden tables where people would gather, the open kitchen where she would create her future. It wasn't a half-painted nursery built on a lie. This was real and it was all hers. Months after securing the investment, the Flavors of Home Bakery opened its doors. The transformation of the old bookstore was breathtaking. Julia, tapping into her dormant graphic design skills, had created a space that was the physical embodiment of its name. Warm, inviting, and elegant. The exposed brick, the reclaimed wood, the soft lighting, and the irresistible aroma of baking butter and sugar created an atmosphere that was instantly calming. Opening day was a phenomenal success. The line stretched down the block, fueled by the considerable social media buzz the bakery had generated, and the local press coverage. Julia, moving between greeting customers and putting the finishing touches on a fresh batch of croissants, felt a joy so pure it almost made her weep. Isabella was there effortlessly manning the cash register, and Mr. Thompson sat at a corner table, beaming with a grandfatherly pride. Even Sarah Chen from the Daily Grind stopped by, giving Julia a knowing, triumphant smile. This was her victory, witnessed by the small village that had helped her build it. The bakery quickly became a beloved neighborhood institution. It was more than a place for coffee and a cake. It was a community hub. Julia knew her regulars by name. She hired her first 2 employees, a young, aspiring pastry chef and a friendly barista, freeing her up to focus on developing new recipes and managing the business. She was no longer just a baker. She was a CEO, a boss, a job creator, and Heather's success did not go unnoticed by Michael. He drove past the bakery one afternoon on his way to a meeting. He saw the cheerful, professionally designed logo, the crowd of people inside, the warm glow spilling out onto the street. He saw Julia through the window, laughing with a customer, looking radiant and confident. She was wearing a kik apron over a simple dress, her hair pulled back, a pen tucked behind her ear. She looked happy. She looked powerful. It was a jarring image that didn't fit the narrative he had built for himself. That of the broken woman he had left behind. The true encounter, however, came at a city-sponsored festival, the London Festival of Flavors. Flavors of Home had a prominent stall, and Julia was personally handing out samples of her new seasonal creation, a spiced pumpkin and maple tart. The line was one of the longest at the event. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the counter. Julia looked up from the customer she was serving, and her smile froze. It was Michael. And by his side, clinging to his arm, was Valerie. Valerie was exactly as Julia had imagined, impeccably beautiful. dressed in a designer suit. Her expression was one of bored superiority. Michael looked uncomfortable. His eyes darted around as if looking for an escape. "Julia," he said, his voice strained. "What a coincidence to see you here." "It's a nice setup, Michael," Julia replied, her voice firm and professional, betraying none of the turmoil swirling inside her. She gave Valerie a polite nod. "Welcome to the Flavors of Homestall. Would you like to try a sample?" No. The offer threw him off balance. He had expected an emotional scene, perhaps some lingering bitterness. This coldness, this distant civility was disarming. Valerie let out a small, condescending laugh. "We don't really eat street food," she said, her eyes sweeping over the stall with disdain. "But it's adorable what you've done. Really, turning a little hobby into all this." The word hobby was laced with venom. Julia felt a flash of anger, but she refused to let it show. She simply smiled. "It's certainly more than a hobby. It's my business, my career, and it's doing very well." Michael shifted his weight, clearly wanting the interaction to end. "Well, we should go. We have a reservation at the Clove Club." He named one of the city's most exclusive and expensive restaurants. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to reassert his status. But before they could leave, a familiar voice boomed from behind them. "Julia, my dear, these tarts are a triumph. An absolute triumph." It was Mr. Miller, the senior partner of Velasco and Solis, Michael's ultimate boss, a man of immense influence and a known gastronome. He held a half-eaten tart, a look of genuine delight on his face. "Mr. Miller, I'm glad you like them," Julia said, her smile now genuine. "Like them, I love them. I want to order 3 dozen for the firm's client reception on Friday," he declared, pulling out his phone to jot down the details. He then noticed Michael and Valerie standing awkwardly to the side. "Michael, what are you doing here?" Miller asked, his tone shifting from jovial to professional. "Didn't take you for a man of the people?" He then looked from Michael to Julia and back again, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Wait a moment, Garcia. You're the one he, Mr. Miller, ashrewd and perceptive man," left the sentence hanging. The implication was clear. Michael's face went pale. Valerie's polite smile became a rigid mask. Julia, seizing the opportunity, extended her hand to the older man. "It's a pleasure to officially meet you, Mr. Miller. I'm Julia Garcia, and yes, my team and I would be delighted to cater your reception." She had taken control of the situation, calmly and completely, making a business contact with Herrick's husband's boss, while Michael stood by, powerless. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. As Mr. Miller discussed delivery details with Julia, Michael grabbed Valerie's arm and pulled her away. Muttering a hasty goodbye, they left without looking back. But Julia could feel his humiliation like a heat wave. Valerie was furious. "Did you see that? The way he looked at us, the way she acted so smug. You told me she was a nobody." "She wasn't a nobody," Michael insisted, but his words lacked conviction. He had just witnessed in a public, resounding way that Julia was now very much a somebody. She was a respected business owner, a colleague of his own boss, and in that moment, in front of the man whose approval he most craved, she had made him feel small and insignificant. The sweet taste of his new life suddenly became unmistakably bitter. Question and call to action. Julia's success wasn't just about her. It was a mirror that reflected Michael's failure. Do you think true victory is personal success, or is it seeing the downfall of the person who hurt you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this story of empowerment, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content. The encounter at the festival was a crack in the pristine facade of Michael and Valerie's life. For Michael, seeing Julia's success firsthand and the respect she commanded from his own boss planted a seed of doubt that began to sprout, watered by the growing dissatisfaction in his own life. The intellectual synergy he had boasted of with Valerie had proved to be a ruthless shared ambition that left little room for genuine connection or warmth. Their conversations revolved around money, status, and appearances. The Zenith Tower apartment felt less like a home and more like a showroom. Beautiful, but cold, lacking the scent of fresh paint and shared dreams that had once filled his apartment with Julia. For Valerie, the incident was a threat. Julia wasn't supposed to be thriving. She was supposed to fade away, a sad footnote in Michael's past. This prosperous, confident version of her was an unwanted complication. A rival in Agame, Valerie was determined to win. Her possessiveness over Michael intensified. Her criticisms grew sharper, her demands more extravagant. The golden cage had begun to rattle. The real unraveling, however, began within the walls of Velasco and Solis Gregorio. Michael's partner at the firm was a meticulous and cautious architect who had always been a little wary of Valerie's aggressive corporate style. He began to notice irregularities in the financial projections for the development Mirador project, the same project that had brought Valerie and Michael together. The figures seemed inflated, and the timelines for material acquisitions didn't quite add up. He raised his concerns to Michael, who, blinded by his infatuation and his desire to impress Valerie, dismissed them. "You're being too cautious, Greg," Michael had said. "Valerie knows what she's doing. This is how big business is done." But Gregorio couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He began his own quiet investigation, working late into the night, cross-referencing invoices and supplier contracts. What he uncovered was a carefully constructed web of deception. Valerie had been systematically overbilling the project through a series of shell companies, funneling the excess funds into an offshore account. The primary vendor she had insisted on using, a company called Apex Innovations, was owned by a man named Simon Ray, Valerie's former business partner and ex-lover. They were siphoning millions from Velasco and Solis, planning to bleed the project dry and then disappear. Meanwhile, Julia's catering gig for the Velasco and Solis reception was a triumph. The firm's wealthiest and most influential clients raved about the sophisticated cakes and impeccable service. Mr. Miller was so impressed he offered Flavors of Home, a permanent corporate contract to supply all their client meetings and events. It was a massive game-changing deal for Julia's business. The irony was not lost on her. The firm that had enabled her husband to discard her was now becoming her single largest client. One night, desperate and feeling the walls closing in, Gregorio went to the only person he felt he could trust to be discreet and who had a vested interest in the truth: Julia. He found her at the bakery long after closing, sweeping the floor. While Leo slept in his stroller in the corner, he laid out his evidence on one of the cafe tables. Bank statements, falsified invoices, corporate records, linking Valerie to Simon Ray. "I know this is a lot to ask," Gregorio said, his voice heavy with stress. "But Michael won't listen to me. He's completely deluded. This is going to destroy him and could ruin the firm. You're the only one who seemed to be able to reason with him." Julia looked at the documents, her heart pounding. It was worse than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a calculated criminal conspiracy. She felt a strange detached pity for Michael. He had thrown away his family for a woman who was using him as a pawn in a multi-million-euro heist. A week later, Michael showed up on the doorstep of Julia's apartment, the one she now rented in a quiet, respectable building 2 blocks from her bakery. He looked terrible. His face was haggarded with dark circles under his eyes. His expensive suit was crumpled. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice raspy. Julia hesitated. Then she stood aside. Her small apartment was filled with the signs of her new life. Leo's toys scattered on the rug, sketches of new cake designs on the coffee table, the lingering aroma of vanilla. "Valerie left," he said, sinking onto her sofa uninvited. "She's gone." She emptied the accounts. "She took everything." Gregorio presented his findings to Miller this morning. "There's going to be a full-scale investigation. I'm going to be ruined, Julia. My career is over." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "A terrible, unforgivable mistake. She was a fantasy, a mirage. You and Leo are my reality. You were always my reality. I was just too stupid to see it." He reached out a hand for hers. "Please, Julia, let me come home. I can fix this. We can fix this. For Leo, for us." Julia looked at the man before her. The arrogant, cold stranger from that rainy October night was gone, replaced by a broken, desperate shell. For a fleeting moment, she felt a pang of the old love, the memory of the life they were supposed to have. But then she looked past him to the life she had built on her own. She thought of the terror, the tears, the lonely nights, the grueling work. She thought of Isabella's unwavering support, Mr. Thompson's quiet faith in her, and the pride she felt every time she turned the key in the door of her own bakery. She gently withdrew her hand. "There is no home for you to come back to, Michael," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "You burned that one down, and you are not welcome in the one I built from the ashes." She saw the last flicker of hope die in his eyes. He had come to her expecting absolution, a soft place to land. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman she had become. She was not his backup plan, not a harbor in his storm. "I need you to leave now, Michael," she said, walking to the door and opening it. Hester stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and desperation. He finally understood. He had not only lost Valerie and his career, he had lost Julia completely and irrevocably. He stumbled out of the apartment into the hallway. A man who had traded a treasure for a handful of glittering dust and now was left with nothing. Final call to action. Julia proved that true strength lies in the ability to build, not in the act of revenge. Her story teaches us that the deepest pain can become the force that propels us to create our best selves.